No Christian nation had abolished Negro slavery. Until she spoke, the slave trade was sanctioned by all the Christian nations of the world, and all land of liberty and light included. Until Haiti spoke, the church was silent, and the pulpit dumb. Frederick Douglass, 1893.
The year is 1789, and for the French colony of Saint Dominic on the Caribbean island of Hispaniola, sugar and coffee are king. There are over 465,000 slaves here, and most of them work on plantations. The sugar and coffee industries represent 40% of the total value of France's foreign trade, and slavery is essential to the cash crop machine. The majority of the slaves in Saint Dominic are of African descent, either born into their condition or taken from their homes across the Atlantic. However, change is on the horizon for the slaves of Saint Dominic. In France, unrest is turning into violence. From this violence, a new way of thinking will come to rule, and Saint Dominic will be emancipated. But greed will inevitably corrupt once again, and for slavery to be abolished here for good, the people of Saint Dominic will have to fight to become the free state of Haiti.
France's dependence on slavery came from the mercantile system of the European imperial powers. When the Europeans landed on American soil, they tried to establish their nation's supremacy through conquest and settlement. This power struggle had been sort of brewing in Renaissance Europe for more than a century before Columbus had even landed. While the feudal system fell, European monarchs gained power and commanded armies of unprecedented size. Because the nations began to compete for supremacy, the strength of the state economy became vitally important.
It was in this spirit that Europeans, first the Spanish, came to the Americas in the late 15th century. Christopher Columbus called his westward journey the enterprise of the Indies. Soon it became apparent that Columbus had not reached the Indies, but an entirely new world. Conquistadors came in the name of conquest. Encomenderos traveled to the New World, land grants in hand, and Catholic priests set up their missions in hope of converting the natives. The rest of Europe watched the Spanish prosper from their exploits. It was only a matter of time before Spain's neighbors claimed their own states in the New World. Unlike the Spanish, the French originally traveled to the New World to find the infamous Northwest Passage, a legendary waterway that would bypass the North American continent, providing a trade route to the Indies. Unfortunately for the French, the Northwest Passage turned out not to exist, and their early attempts of settlement were equally unsuccessful. After several failed attempts in the 16th century, the first permanent French settlement of Quebec was established by Samuel de Champlain in 1608. Over the next 100 years, France would lay claim to 3/4 of the North American continent. Their territory, though sparsely populated by French citizens, extended from the Gulf of Mexico into present-day Canada, surrounding Great Britain's colonies along the east coast. French colonization in the Caribbean largely began in 1635. The islands of Guadeloupe and Martinique, both originally discovered by Columbus, became the first of what was known as the French Antilles. Both islands developed economies based on sugar, and by 1642 slaves from Africa were brought to work the sugar plantations, despite France's free legacy. Although French colonists had somewhat of a standing in Saint Dominic throughout the 17th century, it was not until 1697 that Spain ceded Saint Dominic to the French, even though they still controlled the rest of Hispaniola. However, Saint Dominic soon became the largest, most important French colony in the Caribbean. By 1780, Saint Dominic was producing half the world's coffee and as much sugar as Brazil, Cuba, and Jamaica combined. With the discovery of sugar, capitalism increased. The enormous demand dictated more sugar be produced at a cheaper price. In addition, expenses such as the 7 Years' War bankrupted the French government, and the slave system offered the colonial revenue France needed. As a result, French Caribbean territories developed strong economies dependent on the slave trade. Sugar and slavery came to lie at the heart of Caribbean history.